So now in this coming hour, we'll be focusing on creating a new generation of services and capabilities based on spaceborne networks. We have two companies who are able to share their ideas here directly, and a third who's provided us with quite a thought-provoking demo video, but who won't be able to make it here in person. Now, as we go along, again, for those of you online, if you'd like to ask a question or send in a comment, put it in the Q&A. I will try and make sure that we've got more time for this in the conversation. I'd like to welcome Randhir Chuni from Viavi and Chris Benker from NI, who'll shortly share their demos. But I actually think that SES Satellites has given us quite an interesting introduction. Now they don't have somebody in-house, if you like, here, but I think what they've shared is actually a good introduction to what the satellite industry today is currently capable of. And so then we can potentially use that as the basis to explore as well what Viavi and NI are able to share. So let me set that up for you here.
I'm Brady Spinrath, Manager of Product Marketing for the Enterprise and Cloud Vertical at SES. And before we talk about our main topic, I want to set the scene a little bit. By the year 2030, we're expecting that 125 billion devices will be online. For every human being, we expect them to have about 15 devices associated with them that need to use the internet. And that's a challenge because the internet was originally built by and for human beings. We downloaded more data than we consumed originally. We shared text and images. And as social media came around, that did start to change. People wanted that experience everywhere they go. They did start to upload more things to the internet than they did before, as we started to have video calls and sharing full video on social media. And so that led to the 4G and LTE era of the internet. But looking ahead, and now that we're in the 5G era, a lot of that was built for the Internet of Things, for all of these devices coming online, needing to be a part of our lives, and maybe even in your house. Maybe you already have a voice-activated assistant. Maybe you have a baby monitor or a smartwatch. And so these things are uploading a lot of data to the internet, and that influences the way that we interact with the internet and the way we need to build it. And so that's how the Internet of Things has informed the growth of 5G. So the number of devices coming online, the amount of data they need to upload to the cloud, the amount of data they send to servers and services, sometimes doesn't even need to be used, but just is always being sent and always being stored, means that we need to emphasize the way we build 5G networks in a way that responds to the Internet of Things. And so my topic for today is private 5G and the Internet of Things. So first I want to talk about the integration of 5G and IoT. And then I'm going to talk about what SES's role is in this space. And finally, I'm going to look at some of the applications and use cases that are enabled by our partnership between satellite, private 5G, and IoT. So let's first talk about the integration of 5G and IoT and how they work together. And I mentioned earlier the example of the Internet of Things in your own household and how you probably have a Wi-Fi router that can handle all that traffic well enough. But industries and enterprises are starting to push the limits of Wi-Fi with thousands of devices connected. That technology that was intended for homes and offices just can't keep up anymore. And so they are moving to 5G. As I mentioned before, it was built from the beginning to be ultra low latency and high throughput and able to handle thousands of devices connected to a single node. So for an example of an industry really getting on board with the Internet of Things and requiring 5G to cover all of those devices, let's use the example of a mining operation. In today's mine, you probably are starting to see a lot of smart sensors. So maybe air quality sensors, maybe seismic sensors on the ground. They also have security. So you're starting to see smart 5G enabled security cameras And then also all of the employees are all carrying on them maybe a radio to talk to everybody else on site. Maybe they're bringing their own cell phone or smartphone in, and they may even be wearing a wearable of some kind that also monitors the air quality that they're breathing, or checking their vitals, or something else that's on their person at all times and transmitting information at all times. And then a really exciting development is that we're also starting to see more and more autonomous mining. So even some of the machinery is being driven remotely or even autonomously, and obviously needs connectivity to do so. And so with all of these thousands of devices, Wi-Fi isn't cutting it anymore, and mines are deploying private 5G. In a mesh network like this, so 5G box talks to 5G box, and all of these devices and sensors are connected wirelessly to 5G. Now, you've heard me mention a few times that we're going to be talking about private 5G. And so if you're not familiar with this space, you might be asking, well, what makes it private? Why is it private 5G? And there are really two reasons. If I continue my example of a mining operation, the first is that if you're in an area where a 5G network already exists, you may not always know the environment you'll be working in. So if it's in a busy urban area, for example, users can come in and out of that area and start to use the bandwidth of that network if it's a public 5G network, like from a typical mobile network operator. So you might want to build your own private 5G network in order to segregate the public traffic from your own private traffic, and then you know your applications are going to work no matter what else happens outside of the environment. Another reason private 5G is very popular at mining locations is because these mines often aren't in urban environments. And so the 5G infrastructure doesn't already exist. And so if they need that infrastructure in place, they're going to build their own private 5G network instead of waiting for a public 5G network that might never make it to come to them. So that's why we talk about private 5G. So that's how, in the last mile, 5G and Internet of Things interact. And now all of this usually gets aggregated to a single point, and in the case of a mining operation, might be an edge compute node, which is a fancy way of saying an intelligence that can determine where this data needs to go. Does it need to be stored in the cloud? Can I analyze this locally? So for example, if two employees are calling each other on the radio or over the phone, obviously that voice traffic just needs to stay locally. But there are times data needs to leave this environment. For example, if they need more analysis than can be done locally, that data might need to be going to a cloud data center where it can either be analyzed or stored. Or these users who are making phone calls, if they need to call out beyond the mine, maybe call headquarters, for example, then that might need to go to the telephone company and just join their core network and figure out where that needs to be routed internationally. So when edge compute determines that there's data that needs to leave, that's where SES comes in. And with our high throughput satellites now delivering low latency as well, we can enable these applications to get outside of the mine and get back to wherever else on Earth that data needs to go.
And yeah, with that, I think that's fundamentally the SES message is that they can now be enabling that private 5G and IoT, which I think is quite an interesting piece. But having said that, I don't want to linger too long on there. Instead of which, we have two people ready to sort of share their own demos and things. So with that in mind, let me turn over and introduce you to Randy Achuni from Viavi. Randy.
Hi, Alex. Yeah, so I have a set of slides. Is that okay if I present them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm talking from Viavi Solution. So Viavi is a test and measurement company. We have been involved in non-terrestrial network for a number of years now, and I want to give an overview of where NTN is going, especially with NB-IoT and NR, and also talk a bit about our test capabilities. So, as I said, I'm Randy Achuni. I am the solution architect at Viavi, and my main focus is on testing 5G and NTN. I'll just quickly go through that. So VRV is a NASDAQ-listed company, and we operate in network and service enablement. And this is the division I work for, and this is where most of the NTN work is carried. And we also had an OSP division, which also have some, some input into NTN, but mainly NSE is a big player. I just want to talk a bit about the NTN market trend, right? So the question is, 24 years ago, we had GSM, which was providing via satellite service. Why we think it will work this time along? So there have been lots of changes in recent years. We have seen there's a big push between satellite and cellular convergence. We've seen in release 17 have been introduction of NR-NTN and NB-NTN. There seems a push to have a seamless integration between terrestrial network and cellular network. We've seen other players like OneWeb, Kuiper, who's putting mega constellation, and they're focusing on global broadband and low latency. So there's another push from other people other than 3GPP. We've seen direct-to-device, where you doesn't need any special changes in this chipset, and so forth. And lastly, there's an expansion of NB-IoT over NTN. So other existence is, we talked about 3GPP and NTN. There is a slide. Can you see the slide changing?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can I? Okay.
Yeah, so we can see at the moment the coexistence and convergence slide.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, right. Yeah. So we said there's been lots of changes between regulation and spectrum advances. We have been harmonizing about the band that can be used for NTN. There's L band, S band, K band, and KU band has been released to be used for NTN. And regarding 6G, there has been a push to have a ubiquitous global coverage. So 6G is going to be native for space and air-ground integration. And, at VRV, we can see there's so many changes going around, and we provide a number of testing and validated solutions which will help the market progress NTN. So if you look at what's there in 3GPP, the communication architectures that are present, typically in release 17, there's a transmit architecture where the satellite is just acting as a repeater. Going forward with release 18 and release 19, we're looking at having regenerative architecture where the satellite is hosting the GNOD. And that is a future, especially with modern LEO systems. So this is, typical deployment, GEO satellite, fixed altitude. We have MEO satellite and you have LEO satellite, and each of those give you different features, right? So LEO, we're looking at low latency high capacity. Where you go on the other side, you have GEO, which is broad coverage and stable connection. So the question is, what are the challenges with satellite communication versus traditional terrestrial? So first challenge is a large propagation delay, right? The satellite is in space, so obviously the delay is very high. So we're talking of the order of 20 milliseconds if we're talking about LEO satellite. Because of the mobility of LEO satellite, we have high Doppler shift, which the UE needs to deal with, or the network and the system needs to deal with. And then there's link variability. can have rain fade and so forth, right? Depending on the atmospheric condition. So the link is not as stable as terrestrial. Because of the mobility, there's beam tracking and handover challenges that comes in with NTN. And last is we had to make, because of delays in the system, we had to make lots of adaptation to the protocols, right, to deal with the delays and so forth. And again, power is limited from a UE. So if you're using a UE, then the power is quite limited to talk to satellite which is far away. So an adaptation needs to be made for these challenges. Other thing is, other challenges we foresee is security, because satellite is having an open broadcast, anyone can tap into it. So security concern, and hence, we had to put strong defense mechanisms against those security threats, right? Other challenges we see is timing synchronization. All satellite is moving all the time. And there's load propagation delay, variable delay. So how do you keep everything in sync is a challenge. And NTN needs GNSS capabilities for the whole network to work, right? So this is a different area of challenges we need to tackle if you need to get NTN, NR-NTN or NB-IoT NTN to work. So what can we expect, right? So if you're connecting to a terrestrial versus an NTN, what can we expect? So there will be some degradation as you expect in latency. Also, having a large constellation or LEO satellite try to mitigate the latency that come inherently with NTN. In terms of data rate, typically you have high data rate with terrestrial, but with NTN, there's a push to have, still medium to high data rate. But again, doing smart constellation deployment. Instead of coverage, we have again with NTN, which has global coverage and so forth, right? Next, I want to talk about standardization. We had release 17 and release 18. Release 17 really set the scene for NTN. We had it for NR and NB-IoT. And mainly there we have a transport architecture. Going forward, we're having more features coming in NTN, especially in release 18 and release 19. Release 18 is looking at operating at FR2, which enables VSAT types of deployment, where we could have broadband capabilities similar to what Starlink gives these days, but here is a 3GPP specification. Going forward, release 19 is due December this year. We're looking at regenerative architecture, looking at stored and forward, which enable many features with NB-IoT. We're looking even at TDD NB-IoT and the release of Ku-band. So yeah, so we are VRV, right? So we do NTN testing, and I'll talk a bit about, we talk about the challenges and just talk a bit more about, potentially, what solution we provide. So we said we need to emulate channels, right? So we provide solution with channel emulation, which can emulate large delay, high Doppler, and variable single strength. The other challenge is Doppler compensation. Because of the rapid shift of the LEO satellite, you will experience Doppler shift. So the system is able to track those Doppler shift, and we provide again solution to emulate that in your lab and see how well your GNOD and the network in general works, right, with Doppler in the system. Next bit, because of satellite mobility, there's handover, there's frequent handover that happens. There's beam hopping that happens that needs to be tested. So in general, the beam management needs to be tested thoroughly in the lab before we can have a live deployment. Other thing which was important is, as I mentioned before, the delay and timing alignment is tested. GNSS and position also needs tested. So these are the big kind of ticket items that need tested when we're dealing with NTN. So when we talk about testing, we can segregate it into UE to RAN testing. So you think about the UE talking to the RAN. So there again, we provide solution across the board, right? We talk about, the challenges, and we can help you to do that. And we provide a number of equipment, UE emulation, channel emulation, or protocol analyzers, just to understand what's going on, right, between the UE and the RAN. And then you want to test end-to-end, so UE to RAN to core and back to your internet or application server. So, in an end-to-end solution, we also partnership with Rohde & Schwarz, where they emulate the GNode B, and also we can have a co-emulation which VIAVI provides. So end-to-end, we provide the solution, which I later have a small video just to go through that. So pictorially, if you think about the different aspects of testing, we talk about the link, right? We talk about try to in the lab, can we bring real world modeling into the lab? So we do that, and also we provide formulation. We provide synthetic data for generating data to effectively train AI models and so forth. So lastly, I'm going to talk about this end-to-end digital twin we have, right? So that's in partnership with Rohde & Schwarz and the TM500, which is emulating the UE. And we have the CMX500, which is emulating the GNode B and the channel. So this is effectively, if you want have for example, a call between between two UEs, we could test that end to end, and we also provide real data apps, which is one of our product, TeraVM product, which provide real data apps to do the call between the two UEs, and then it will give you KPIs, tells you how well that call went. Okay, that's it from me, Alex. I have a small video. If there's no other questions, I can play the video.
I think if it's a quick one, then let's
should be quick. Yeah. Okay. So, do you see the slides now or the video?
It's the slides, yeah.
Slides, okay.
Today's rapid advancements in non-terrestrial networks, evaluating end-to-end performance before rollout is more important than ever. That's why VIAVI has partnered with Rohde & Schwarz to develop an NTN digital twin testbed, which characterizes the performance of NTN networks and traffic transmitted across them. The NTN digital twin evaluates end-to-end connectivity and performance, determining the reliability, stability, and quality of service experienced by an NTN anywhere on Earth, all from the comfort of your life. The testbed realistically accounts for the distance, speed, and mobility of both satellite and all in a fully controllable environment that supports both NTN and TNE. When working with satellite technology, there's no room for error. By combining the VIAVI's top UE emulator with the Rohde & Schwarz premium base station emulator, users are able to predict and troubleshoot issues, optimize resource allocation, and test a variety of scenarios cost-effectively, showing that you can connect the lab to an NTN system using TM500 as a UE emulator, the RDA as a data source, and CMX500 as an emulated GNode B, as well as emulating the NTN channel. And as we saw, the delays and the distances that we observed from that setup. The NTN Digital Twin offers true end-to-end performance evaluation under a variety of conditions and configurations, all with the lowest footprint in the market. Benefit from the collective talent and expertise of the two world's leading test and measurement companies. Single point of contact to access a wealth of resources. The NTN Digital Twin in VRV Road of Schwartz. That's the world.
Okay, thanks, Ben, Randir.
Thank you.
That was, yeah, really helpful. And I think, Monica and Keith, if you have any questions or observations at this point, I will get to you on this, but I think it would be actually quite relevant to turn over at this point to Chris Benke over at NI, and because I think there's a sensible story emerging here. Chris, over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Hey everyone. So quick introduction. So my name is Chris Benke. I'm the business line lead for our aerospace and defense business unit at NI Emerson. And my area of expertise and kind of background is in what I call RF hardware in the loop system validation for a wide variety of applications in that market. And so building on the excellent presentation from the Viavi team, I think NI is tracking a lot of similar I'll say market trends and challenges, particularly when we're taking an application space that's existed for quite some time, right? Satellite space, et cetera, and shifting it more towards what I'll call higher volume consumer communications, right? And so from our perspective, maybe taking a little bit higher altitude to some of the great technical details from the previous presentation, there's a couple key trends that we're seeing that I think are important to be paying attention to as we cultivate and build out these applications. One is obviously the shift from what I'll say traditional high mix, low volume applications, right? Communications in space has existed for quite some time, but they've been very pointed applications for particular use cases. That is shifting now to more what I'll call generalized or higher volume consumer type communication pipes. But then the other aspect is just the software defined nature of it. If you can, sorry, is my video coming through?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What we're seeing is a shift away from very pointed payloads that are designed specifically for certain applications to really taking advantage of software-defined radios and kind of highly adaptable, RF subsystems, which gives, of course, the network providers, the satellite orchestrators, et cetera, a lot of versatility. But it also creates a very difficult challenge when it comes to validating that the payload design itself is going to be sufficient for all those future states and future applications. And so, long story short, in addition to all the technical challenges of just dealing with things in space and orbit, one of the areas where NI is looking to partner with the industry and help cultivate is how do I provide that validation, that system integration testing in a manner that can scale along these same vectors, right? So again, how can we use commercial test instrumentation and evolve and adapt that to scale throughout the life cycle, whether it be initial design and modeling, characterization, integration labs, all the way to higher volume production, either at the satellite side or the consumer UE side. But then also, how do I use that same test investment, right, which is not cheap, to basically scale with the capability of these networks as they evolve, right? And we do that by basically mimicking that same software-defined nature behind the scenes of our commercial instruments. So the video we're going to show today, Alex, thanks for playing it in a minute, is basically an example of how we take traditional instrumentation, namely our vector signal transceiver, which at its base can do things that a normal spectrum analyzer or generator can do, but then extend that with software-defined and FPGA technology to add in things like channel emulation or even modem or endpoint emulation to complete the links that are often needed to be validated in these application spaces. So with that, maybe I'll hand it over back to you guys to play that video if you don't mind.
Sure.
Hello, my name is Giuseppe Gentile. I'm the CEO of which is an Italian SME company in the aerospace sector. Excited to talk about this project that we have done together with our partner NI on a transmitter and receiver for CCSDS, which is emulating a transmission and reception chain from satellite. We are a digital designer, so we have developed the encoder modulation, decoder and demodulation of the chain, and we have to find the hardware where to put it in. And we have decided to look into the NI hardware because they have really an amazing piece of hardware. So we have integrated our system in those boards from NI. So we have VST, which is basically doing the RF front end, and in case of the receiver is actually receiving the RF signal, and in case of the transmitter is actually transmitting the RF signal. And we have put our IP inside another digital board, which is the PXI 7903, where we have implemented our encoder and modulation there. So I have to say that it was really a pleasure and excitement to work together with NI in this wonderful project. The integration and cooperation with the people was wonderful. And of course, this was made possible by this fantastic hardware. But now I will hand over to Sastri, which is actually managing the demo directly, which will show you how it actually works. Sastri, to you.
So as Giuseppe has explained the pattern of the work, in this case, I'm going to show you the actual demo. So the first, just to give you a little bit heads up, the workflow is where we create a Vivado export, and in the Vivado export, the IP is plugged in, and so that once the IP is plugged in, the bit file is generated. But now it has all the links to connect to an actual real RF hardware for the real testing with the RF signals. So in this case, we have a transmitter, a CCSDS standard 131B2 compliant transmitter is generating a signal, and we are actually passing it, we are generating on our FlexRio processor 7903, which in turn through the MGT links conforming to the Aurora protocol is sending that signal into our VST 5842, which in turn is generating the RF signal. Another interesting thing is all these parameters of the IP can be configured using the AXI stream, and on the fly while the signal is being generated, we can change this pattern. So for example, you can see in this particular case, we are generating an ACM format 5, which is a QPSK signal. So you can see that this is the spectrum of the signal. It is a 500 megahertz signal. We can the CCSDS standard is a high data rate application. It's a wideband signals that are being created. Now, while the signal is generated, I can change the ACM format and load, and you will notice that the constellation has changed to an 8 PSK. And this while the streaming is happening at high rate of 2 gigasamples per second through the RF signal generator. Next, while it is generating the 8 PSK, I'm going to change the ACM format to 15, which in turn generates a 16 PSK APSK constellation. And so all these modulation formats are used for higher data rate applications, and it generates up to 64 APSK. Let's see that quickly. I will change it while we are generating the 16 APSK. I change the ACM format on the fly, and now it will be a 32 APSK. And similarly, I go to the last ACM format, which will then generate a 64 APSK. All these ACM format and other parameters of the IP can be configurable on the fly through the AXI interface that is provided by the IP. This is a huge thing for FPGA developers in the Vivado environment to directly connect to the NI RF hardware and do the real world testing with the RF signals.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for playing that. So just quickly to maybe circle back on the point there. So again, what you saw in that video was the integration of, in this case, a partner of ours, IP, that is a ratified protocol for CCSCS communications, which is in itself scaling to high data throughput, similar to 5G NTN, being deployed on commercial instrument grade hardware to very quickly merge those two worlds of what I'll call functional testing and system emulation, right? All on the same kind of integrated system and bench. So our thought, again, partnering with industry, is how do we accelerate that capability of really merging all those different levels of testing, again, from model validation to design verification to actual mission validation of the communication protocol itself, on a highly correlated and adaptable test solution. So thanks.
Thanks very much, Chris. So having said that now, I think I'd like to turn over to our thought leaders here. And first of all, I should give a proper welcome to Monica Paolini for joining us here on this session. Monica, I don't know if you'd like to do a quick introduction to yourself, just in case there's anyone that doesn't know you, and maybe share some of the questions or thoughts that have popped up as you've been watching these presentations and demos.
Alex, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a nice format that we have here today. I am a Sensafilm, an independent analyst and consultant, and I work on whatever topic catches my attention. And so, you know, I've been working on pretty much anything, and I'm not going to go into details. Just go and look at my Sensafilm website. So let me just talk about what is that sort of my feedback on the presentations today. I've been doing a lot of work on testing and monitoring, and with the first project I thought, oh my god, this is so boring, testing. My god, you know, how much more boring can you get? And in fact, I couldn't be farther away from right, because testing, it's really so crucial and so cool, and that's where you see where things really work or not. So it is actually quite exciting thing to do. But at the same time, as I've been working on it, you see that that's evolving. So in the spirit of trying to be to sort of think a little bit out of the box here, what I would like to sort of engage the speakers and ask them is, how should we think about testing in a world where things change constantly? So back in the day, you have a network, satellite or otherwise, you test it, and then you go home, sort of, and you let it go. But now things change all the time, and you have to monitor all the time. And so that's a bigger challenge. So testing becomes more important, and it becomes adjacent and overlaps with monitoring. So how should we think about it? So that's kind of my sort of first question. I think with satellite is also specifically a problem, because you know you just have all sorts of situations where you cannot just test everything, but you want to make sure everything works well. So what's the borderline? The other thing, which is more specific to our both presentations, is that Chris mentioned the difference between functional testing and system emulation, and right here talk about digital twin. And I was just thinking, and in a way, isn't the system emulation just a form of digital twin? In a sense that when you do a digital twin, you're just emulating the system, right? Well, you're not really emulating the system, emulating a variation on the system. So maybe it gives you more. But I was wondering whether you could just sort of a little bit tell us, you know, what do you see as the difference there? And then I can have some more specific questions.
I can take that, yeah. So I guess you're right to an extent, right? I guess digital twin, you know, you can call it a fancy name for testing, but I guess the point is you're trying to get as close as if the system was deployed, right? how close can you get to deploy system but still test it in the lab, right? I.e., how close can the twin get to the physical deployment itself? So we spend quite a amount of time researching that and see, if you look at the challenges of a NTN link, like Doppler, delay, and so forth. I mean, traditionally we'll test that with a channel emulation, right? And if usually a channel emulation, you will have different providers in the market, right? Will provide those, and you will try to emulate this channel in the lab. And you say you have tested it, and fading or delay Doppler and in different link budget, right? So when it comes to digital twin, then the question is, well, maybe that's fine, but that model, for example, so you had a fading model, which would be a say CDL model or a TDL model, or stochastic model. So it will represent a mean of how the channel will look like. But if you want to go one step beyond that, you want to replicate exactly what you think will happen if you deployed it over, I don't know, so over New York or over the ocean and so forth, right? So then you have this concept of ray tracing, where you could try to emulate the environment and bring it back in the lab. So you could model where the transmitter was, where the receiver was it raining that day, how many, was a boat going by, or did the satellite cross in its line of sight, there was a building, and so forth, right? So you try to bring that environment back into your lab, and you could use ray tracer to effectively emulate a channel. And then once you get the channel, you could play that on a device, for example, and channel emulator, which would be much more representative of what will happen if you did deploy that, in some specific use cases, right, as opposed to be more general. So yeah, so I guess it's this distinction between the two, and the industry seems to be thinking that going towards a higher fidelity model is more representative and will add more value. So we are working on solution to do that currently. Probably we'll launch that potentially next year. But yeah, I think that's a differentiation between just testing and having a digital twin, for instance.
Thanks, Randir. I'm going to give Keith a chance to jump in on this, because I think there is certainly quite a lot of conversation we could have about where we go with what is testing versus what is actually just service assurance in the live environment, because it does seem as though that's blurring. But Keith, maybe we can turn over to you to get some of your thoughts on what you've seen here and how
Sure.
Maybe some of those promises from SES are bearing out through what the others are doing.
For sure. Well, look, my thoughts are probably more general, a bit more macro about the NTN space to start with. I mean, we saw SES put one use case out, which was for the remote mine and having, backhauling the required traffic from the mine and from an intelligent edge node. I'm not sure that's necessarily a specifically mobile case, but as we saw the presentations around the standardization of the features of NTN coming along, and Ranveer lay out some of the technical challenges, is that introducing a need for innovation? We're here at Summer Innovation Day. Is there a sort of technological gap that the industry is addressing? Normally when we see test companies start to gear up, it means something's happening. So I'm interested if we're seeing a little bubble of innovation, if need for innovation, and if so, where that's coming from to meet those technical requirements. And then my other big question, which maybe we come back to, is around that market opportunity and what we actually think is going to happen commercially. There's a lot of investment obviously going in to some of the LEO launches, but I'm interested in maybe some of the views around what the opportunities are for in the telco space. But maybe we just start with that question around innovation, the need for it, and if we're seeing it drive that in the industry.
Some really interesting questions there. Chris, maybe you'd like to comment first?
Sure. But quick bit on the last question too, to circle back on that. I think maybe a different perspective, rather than differentiating test and digital twin or modeling, I think the reality is it's a symbiosis, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the holy grail is to basically be able to model your system perfectly and skip test altogether and go straight to deployment, right? That's what we'd all want to march towards as engineers. But that's not always possible, particularly because you don't know all the facts when you're creating that model, right? And so where test is kind of evolving, particularly at the system level, is how do I circle or close that feedback loop, right? To inform said model with highly accurate testing. So again, built on some of the concepts and technologies the folks at Viavi were mentioning. Same concepts. We're trying to evolve the fidelity of our hardware in the loop and our emulation capabilities so that you have a real world capability to close that loop, inform your model, and iterate and evolve it at the design space without having to spend the extraordinary amount of money of actually deploying a real asset into the theater. So that's kind of our perspective on it. It's not so much that they're different. It's they're two complementary tools. I think in an idealistic future state where we can spend less on practical development and really front load that in the design space and have a quicker way of validating that in a pseudo-realistic scenario. To the technology trends, what we're tracking, and I'm speaking a little bit more broadly than just communications and networks, because we deal with the broader aerospace market. But the technology trends are really just the RF technologies and the back-end digital technologies are evolving very rapidly to effectively enable many more applications, I think, than were ever possible, for sure in terrestrial environments, but now as well as in satellite orbits in space. So things like wider converters, wider band converters, beefier FPGAs, faster digital communications between subsystems. And then that software-defined nature that I was talking about earlier, that's really the main trend that we're seeing, is it's allowing these, what originally were single shot deploy and hope it works, and then you'll have to launch another satellite when you want to change it later, into more of as I think you put, an adaptable kind of evolving ecosystem that allows you to ooch towards capabilities over time as the rest of the environment interoperable or connects to it, which then of course brings in the interoperability aspect, which is another test insertion we have to worry about. But that's kind of the higher trend that we're seeing from a technology perspective, and you can point to everything down to semiconductor processes like GaN technologies, all the way up to again, more design philosophies of using direct sampling as opposed to RF front ends and things like that to just enable that versatility. But fundamentally, it's the satellites moving away from a fixed functionality into you upload a new persona software-defined nature perspective, which could turn a 5G satellite into a habitat or ecosystem monitoring device to look at tree health or oxygen monitoring by just basically changing the software on the payload.
Great, thank you. And actually, speaking of that, I think you and Randy have both mentioned the idea of the software basis of these new satellites, but that only tends to be the case for some of the LEOsats and the smaller CubeSats, and so I'm curious, whether either of you have to work with sort of a certain amount of coexistence with what's already up there, and if there are opportunities that you've seen to for example create upgrades in GEO or MEO orbits. Randy, that's possibly.
Yeah, I think there's some thought having software defined, right? Some stuff so we can have upgrade of the satellite, but those tend to be the newer ones, right? So new one being launched, you want to add extra features to the satellite, so you want to do some type of software upgrade. I'm not sure about the older ones, to be fair, right? Yeah. I was just the previous question. I was going to add something actually, which just came to me, right? I was just thinking, one thing we're seeing more and more is obviously, the general thing of a satellite link is latency, right? So you want to obviously reduce that latency, and there's obviously beamforming to address different cell. So you can see those panels on the satellite, they are effectively producing more and more simultaneous beam at the same time, right? So there's innovation there with digital beamforming. You could see the satellite, initially they were doing 12 beams. Now we're looking at 32 or 64 beams transmitted at the same time for the same panel, right? So the same panel can generate, many more beams. So there's innovation done this, in the RF and in digital beamforming, and you could have those panels, those antenna panels. You could, AST are launching massive panels in space to do signal L-band and S-band, right? So there's innovation there, and also you can have satellite links. You have laser link between the satellites, to effectively minimize latency. You could see there's you forward the data from one satellite to another. So all of those require careful designing and careful algorithm testing in the lab before that can even be deployed, right? So coming full circle, you want to test those new algorithms in the lab. So you want that facility to be able to test that. And, we're testing it, and, you kind of step into digital twinning. That makes sense, right? So, I want to deploy this new algorithm in your satellite. Can I emulate that in the lab before that deployment can happen, right? So there's lots of innovation around this area, both on the RF side and the digital beamforming, and also on the emulation side. How can we get that fidelity, high fidelity back in the lab to emulate complex, forwarding of data from one satellite to another? How can we do the beam management much more efficiently? Because the satellite is moving from one service area to another, then the coverage changes and the beam management changes again, right? So we have sophisticated algorithm being deployed, right? That could be soft deployed, I presume, right? A new algorithm going up. That could be soft deployed, but that needs to be further tested before it can be done. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Now we do have 5 minutes or so left. Monica, I hope that you've sort of found some of that useful, but clearly you're sort of busy just starting to dive in there. I want to make sure that you've got the chance to ask anything else at this point, or raise anything that based on what you've heard.
Yeah, actually, I do have a sort of follow-up question. Very interesting answers. Is that clearly satellite has come a long way. Performance is so much better than it used to be, so we're good. However, the performance, latency is always going to be an issue, capacity, and so on and so forth. So, how is the testing? But that's going to affect different services, different things you do on the network. How is the testing going to take into account the services as well? Sorry, and the quality of experience at the end? Because if you're doing something, latency might or might not matter, or capacity. And so, how is the testing evolving towards testing a specific application or type of traffic rather than the performance of the network?
Yeah, I can jump in maybe quick on that one. So, and I'm probably belaboring the same point, but the evolution of our perspective on it is very similar to that software-defined nature we've talked about a couple of times now. Is at the end of the day, you're emulating something, right? You're emulating the environment in a channel model, all the way to you're emulating the endpoint, which may be the application you're referring to. And so the goal, right, for test, I think, is to again evolve by basically layering on that level of completion, kind of going from your typical traditional RF parametrics all the way to RF parametrics in the environment, all the way to, no, I'm literally emulating the data link itself, perhaps with the real bits, with the real encoder decoder at the end that's showing the video that's actually being transmitted, right? And I think the key there is to provide scale, flexibility, and the real-time nature of it, at the test side of it, so that you can really appreciate and create that application-centric environment. And that extends beyond communications, right? Because a lot of these data links that are being invested in, while fundamentally are for connectivity, are also meant to enable the massive amounts of data that are being collected on some of these sensor payloads that are also being deployed in these same constellations. It's the same concepts. Fundamentally, you can look at the EVM or the quality of the signal all you want, but at the end of the day, if you're not getting the right bits, the right data that's giving you the result of whatever that sensor is, or the result of whatever that UE transmitted up through the pipe, are you really validating it, right? So I think, you know, the short answer, or maybe long answer to a pretty good question, is like we need to be able to scale to really validating the true application itself. And I think that the expectation is that is something that vendors, designers, et cetera, want to see. And so I think the test groups and test vendors like ourselves are investing in that.
Great, thanks. I'll give you a chance to also jump in if you want on this, Randhir, before we tie up.
I was going to say, right, I mean, we had, you know, the same kind of question from a customer. How can, if have an app, right, a data app or so forth, what's the performance on a terrestrial versus an end-to-end, right? So hence, I think in the last video we showed an end-to-end system where you could play that app you have, right, on that end-to-end system, and then monitor its performance, right? And you could get the KPIs, and generally to improve the performance, there's lots of parameters like, you know, timers, beam management, and so forth across the whole run, right? That needs to be tuned. Okay, so by doing an end-to-end test, you get a chance to tune the parameters and say for that app, you know, what best parameters work for those. That's one thing we have done for some of our customers. The other thing we also do is you know, there's lots of AI apps, right, in the rig, for instance, right, on SMO, to tune those parameters automatically. So we have a tool called Run Scenario Generator. So you could, for a deployment, you can generate data that would be used to train any of those AI optimization, you know, apps they have in the SMOs, right? So you could generate data that's equivalent to an NTN link, right? And say, okay, it's NTN link, this is the measurements you're going to get out of an NTN link. Then you could use that data to train any AI apps that is residing in the network. And because you have done that, then the AI app will optimize the parameters of the network when playing those type of applications. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Randhir. I mean, I'd love to carry on this conversation because I think there's still a lot there. But as they say at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, all change,